You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hayden is away this week, off on his honeymoon, so we've got two very special guests here on Arsenal Pass. It is none other than Pablo Pintor, two-time Pro Tour champion, and Tariq Patel, two-time national champion. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. How are you guys doing, Pablo?
Great. I have just finished doing a lot of work around the house. I have taken all summer off and tried to change all of the furniture, paint the walls again, pull back some things, and it's been a nightmare. I should have not done this in the middle of a heat wave. So I have been slacking on Flesh and Blood quite a lot, and Silk Song is coming out today. So that's also another potential problem for my preparation, but let's see how it goes.
And despite all that, you still managed to find time to come on the pod. Thanks again for that. I was never actually a Hollow Knight player. I've heard some very good things about it, though. Tariq, how are you doing?
Thanks for coming here.
I'm doing well. I just got back from Orlando, Florida, where we have a home, prepping it for hurricane season that's currently coming up. I haven't got to play a lot of Flesh and Blood. I was going to go to Kansas, but me and Isaac, our flight actually got canceled to that calling. We showed up to the airport, and last second, our flight gets canceled. But luckily, Evan ended up taking it down with the deck anyways. But I've been itching to play some Flesh and Blood for a while now. 2025 has been kind of a dry year for me in terms of callings. I think I'm on pace for playing exactly 0 callings this year, and not by my own choice. It just happens that every North American calling is falling on wedding weekends, either my own wedding or the next one is on Aaron Shantz's wedding. So a lot of us, aren't able to make the North American callings, and the one that I plan to go to, our flight got canceled last minute. So we kind of hanging around, working on my house in Orlando and working, I guess, living the good life.
Wait a second. Wait, so you're back in the States then? I thought you live in Canada now. Did I miss something?
Yeah, I guess that's a bit confusing, but my wife being American and I'm Canadian, so neither of us have permanent residency in each other's countries yet, so we have to kind of split our time back and forth. So currently we're kind of in the summer, we're hanging out in Canada, and then come the winter, we'll hang out more in the States. But we did a quick trip down there. There was an SEG con last weekend, ended up going to that because it was so close to my house. And we kind of just hurricane prepped the house, got it ready. But yeah, so we kind of split our time depending on the season and what's going on.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, we're going to move on to the news real quick. Hayden's away this week, and viewers, listeners, if you all have more comments and suggestions for who we should get on for guests for the next 2 weeks, feel free to just drop them in the comments and we'll see what we can do about it. The Arsenal Pass Super Slam spoiler is going to be dropping on Monday, US time, Tuesday, New Zealand time. So be on the lookout for that. We all know, obviously, that leaks happened, but we're going to ignore the fact that the leaks happened and continue on with spoiler season because, let's just ignore the leaks. And we won't really be referencing any leaked cards as well. And finally, the big thing, the BnR dropped this past weekend, and that's exactly what we'll be discussing in the main topic with these two extremely illustrious Flesh and Blood players here with us. But before that, Pablo and Tariq, we're going to go into the Command and Cookout, and I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on this. Specifically, Pablo, I know you have experience with this hero, so this question comes from Fancy from the Discord. What is going on with Riptide? They seem to be the most designed for hero in terms of expansion slot support, but all the expansion cards to date are generously incoherent. Does LSS want Riptide to work? And if so, how? Or is Riptide just bait? Pablo, why don't you start us off?
I have always been surprised by the direction LSS took with Riptide's design, right? When we did see the first cards, it were the majestic traps, right? And they seem to suggest like a completely different level of power from what we have seen from the other cards. I have since then changed a little bit of my views. I thought the deck was going to be a very unconventional ranger where he would have a weapon that did work if you had a face-up trap in your arsenal, something like that, like having access to some kind of permanent damage on board if your opponent is not attacking you. It got changed, right? And it is a hero that currently does not have like a signature weapon. Most of the decks I have seen success have played either Death Dealer on a more aggro variant or the defense reactions bow. Sorry, I'm
Dreadbore.
horrendous with card names with Dreadbore. And I think they both have some merits, but neither of them work really well with this ability. And I believe that's the first big problem Riptide has. He has no real whip, right? And we see that problem in a lot of heroes. We have seen it in Assassin, and they did need a lot of cards and a lot of love from LSS devs to change that, right? I believe Riptide has a problem where he's sharing his card pool with some powerful heroes that do not use the cards in the same way as he does. So each of these new cards seems to pull him in different directions, and it is very difficult to build a deck with him, right? You cannot have like enough ways to convert your hand to punish your opponent for not attacking you because of your D-reacts, and at the same time having your D-reacts in, and at the same time having your blues. And almost all of the new cards that they are releasing for him do nothing on their own, right? One does create this token, or one does lets me search for arrow for traps, or another one lets me search for this other specific card and give you an inertia token or whatever. And they do not do nothing on their own. Like they are all synergistic pieces that don't have synergies now. So I don't know. Maybe we're waiting for a Riptide Armory deck or something to make all of this much more cohesive and work. But so far, I believe he did work on a very limited time frame during a Pro Tour because he was a great answer to Sen. But I believe we're not in that in that point of time anymore.
I definitely agree with you that it feels like he doesn't have a weapon. That's been one of my main gripes when I tried to brew the hero. And also when you talk about he's being pulled in all these different directions, that's exactly how it felt. I'm like, okay, I feel like I want maybe some of the aim counter stuff, like from the Azalea Armory deck and from the weapon that he released with, right? Like Barbed Castaway. So you want some aim counter stuff, you want some aim counter arrows. You obviously want traps. Then you also need resource cards for like the more powerful arrows, like Murky Water. And then you also need ways to like convert your hands when they give you space, because one of his biggest problems is getting fatigued. And it was too hard to fit all of this into the same deck that made sense. Tariq, do you have you brewed a Riptide much, or do you have any interest in the hero at all? What are your thoughts on this?
I have. I created a kind of like a red line Murktide or Riptide list. This is almost a year ago. Trying to take advantage of its reloadability and playing like a 0 for 4 out of Arsenal. Very low curve deck. It didn't end up coming to fruition for a lot of the reasons that Pablo and yourself said. Lacking a real weapon meant that, just being able to be fatigued was a very, real threat against any deck that could block well. So I kind of put the deck down. I think from a designer's perspective, it's interesting because they kind of designed it to be almost like a mid-range ranger hero, but it fell short because it never had a weapon. The pulled in different directions. I don't actually blame the designers. I blame this one Spanish player that played it at a pro tour in Amsterdam. I don't remember his name, but he played a very defensive fatigue Riptide list, which was very intelligent because, like you said, it was good into Zen, and it took it to one of its greatest weaknesses. It kind of embodied it and brought it to other decks, and it started fatiguing people. But I think mechanically, the way the designers wanted to play is more of a mid-range, ranger style block and attack. And I think eventually, because so many of the expansion slots, like the viewer mentioned, are being dedicated towards it over time, it will eventually reach a point where Riptide will probably just be this amazing deck. But that's probably why it's kind of getting so many slots, is because it kind of missed its mark on release. And then since that point, the designers have kind of released more and more cards, trying to get it to its, imagined place in the metagame.
So speaking of new cards, I'm going to add on a little bit to this Command and Cookout question because I'm very curious to hear y'all's thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on the new card, Take the Bait? Tariq, let's start with you.
I'm going to be honest. I don't fully understand its place yet. Like, from what I understand, it's a tutor that then also gives your opponent an attack with Go Again. At first, I misread it and I missed that it had Go Again. So I thought it was like literally a time walk, and I was like, wow, that is amazing. And then I reread it, and I'm like, oh, it actually does have go again. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly where it fits in the puzzle. My best guess is there may be a couple more slots that are spoiled that maybe we'll see it, or maybe it's a mechanic for future sets. I know LSS likes doing it, but at this current moment, I'm not sure, because my first take was misreading the card, thinking it was broken, and then going, oh no, wait, this is not what I thought it did.
Yeah, it feels like they want us to play our traps onto the bait token, but I just struggle to see when that's going to be very profitable. Like, you gave them this token, and then they're attacking you, and then you're just using cards on this attack for one. I don't know, Pablo, do you have any thoughts on take the bait?
I don't like using my cards to block my own cards. Usually, that's not a good way to do in this game. So far, I believe the only successful strategy I have seen with this card is playing the Sandscore Greatbow, and I believe it was immobilizing shot. The card that only lets you play one attack action per turn, so that's like eat your attack action. I don't know if it works like that, but that's the only thing that I have seen so far that did seem interesting card. But that requires you to play Sandscore Greatbow, which I am not very happy about, not even in Azalea. Um, so so far, I really don't understand this card. There needs to be something very powerful coming down the line for him, but we are not seeing it yet.
Yeah, I don't fully remember the text of Immobilizing Shot off the top of my head, but I want to say it says non-attack action card and action cards. I'm not even sure if it works with the bait token. We can check that
Oof.
later.
Yeah, maybe.
But yeah, thanks both of you for answering the Command and Cookout, and thank you to Fancy for giving us a Command and Cookout question in the Discord. If you want to get your questions in, you can go ahead and email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com or hop into the Discord like Fancy did and post your question there. We have a channel dedicated to Command and Cookout questions, or you could even DM Hayden and I, or even give one of us a little piece of paper at the next event that you see us at. With that, Tariq and Pablo, we are going to move on to the main topic of the pod, which is a meaty one this time, because we had a massive ban and restricted announcement drop earlier this week, with several cards banned from Classic Constructed. There were some changes to Living Legend as well. We'll get to that later. We're going to start with the Classic Constructed side. I'm just going to read out all the changes, and then we're going to go through them one by one. So, first one, Bonds of Agony is now banned. Golden Tipple Red and Yellow are banned. Plume of Evergrowth is banned. Talk a Big Game is banned, that was a preemptive ban, which is very interesting. And Germinate is now unbanned. So let's go ahead and go in order, and we're going to start with Bonds of Agony. The article mentioned that the idea behind this ban was to take away a little bit of the damned if you do, damned if you don't experience that when you play against Slippy. They put bonds on the table. You have no correct choice unless you have exactly Snag or like 3D Reacts or something, where you can actually no block it and then move on to the next one. Because now you kind of have to put a bunch of blocking cards there and just move on, or you don't block and then you get juiced by Bonds of Agony because of how easy it is to react as well. So, a question to start us off. Does this kill the deck, or do you guys think it is still very playable and is going to be a force in the metagame? Pablo, let's start with you.
Yeah, go ahead. I think that this brings the deck down quite a bit. It was its power play. It was the most powerful thing that the deck could do. It was an incredible, massive bluff that you could do during the game as well, which usually did end up giving you a lot of value just because of the potential threat. And it also affects Take Up the Mantle, right? Which is like the secondary thing why this ban is very important. And actually, I think Take Up the Mantle is the most problematic card out of the two. The combination of both cards, I believe, is the big problem we're discussing here, and I believe it's why Bonds of Agony got banned. Either way, I don't think this card was designed with a Sleepy in mind. It was a card that was powerful, but balanced, or more balanced at least in new, but it's completely bonkers in a Sleepy. And I do think that bringing the deck down a little bit will, of course, affect this place in the metagame. I also think that other decks will rise up because of other bans that we will discuss later, and Sleepy will not be doing as well as he has lately. I still think he will be playable. He's still a very good aggro deck.
I'm so glad you brought up that you think Bonds was at least, it was like powerful but not broken in new, because I do feel similarly, but I know a lot of people disagree, and that could be a hot take. Tariq, do you have any thoughts on the Bonds ban?
Or the
Yeah,
fact that we are both new players.
True. Not biased at all.
There's a couple of points to this. The first one I think is more of a macro perspective. That's kind of interesting. Whenever I'm trying to choose a deck or I'm talking to people about what decks we should be playing at events, in 2025 Flesh and Blood, it's more than just the number. So one of the boxes that any deck of mine has to check is it doing something, above rate a couple times a game? You think about Enigma playing Miragai, Zen playing Art of War before it was banned, or its own mask. Gravy playing one of the six power allies and attacking, or with Golden Tipple, which we'll get to. But anyways, a deck has to usually do some sort of power spike turn, and I think Bonds kind of checked that box for us when we were looking at it for PTs and testing and so forth. So obviously it's a big nerf because now one of Arachne's big plays was just taken away from it. So it became a lot fairer of a deck. Will it still exist in some capacity? Yes, but if that box of is it doing something unfair or really over the top at least once a game is gone, it may be less of a PT contender or a deck contender going forward because it no longer checks that box. In terms of how it's going to change the deck, I think Marionette actually takes a bigger hit than Slippy, funny enough, because Slippy plays okay like a kind of like a mono red ninja deck almost, with a couple of tricks here and there, but its fundamental math doesn't change. Just the Nick gets a little bit worse, so you probably cut that, and you probably can even play the blue black of the Mark Widow and kind of have a similar effect as Bonds of Agony. Similar, not as good, but the deck of itself will probably exist in some capacity, and as long as the metagame is relatively fair, I wouldn't be surprised to see it pop up here and there. But I am a bit surprised that Ellis has decided now was the time to completely take it out, especially with a Guardian set on the horizon. Guardian, if it has more defensive tools, could possibly mitigate Bonds of Agony a little bit, better than some other decks. But it was one I was a little bit surprised about, and will definitely take Slippy down a peg for sure.
Yeah, this was something I was bringing up in the past couple of weeks as well, and I was accused of being very biased, even though I'm not even a Slippy player. I don't even like the deck. But I was wondering if Gravy gets hit and Earth heroes and Guardian heroes get to come back into the meta in some capacity, does Slippy actually need to be taken down a peg? Because as you said, Tariq, like those decks have the defensive capabilities to deal with stuff like Bonds of Agony. But I do think there's potentially some aspect of negative play experience that they were maybe trying to target with the whole Bonds, especially with the whole mantle stuff that Pablo was talking about, which I would like to come back to actually. So in your thoughts, Pablo, you mentioned that you think Take Up the Mantle was a more problematic card. Is that a card you would have preferred to see go away in lieu of the Bonds ban? Or do you think this was a fine hit? Because I think some people would argue that Mantle's only problematic because Bonds existed, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I think Mantle is a very powerful card outside of Bonds existing. It's a very good card. It's a yellow that goes on raid, and that's very powerful, surprising stuff. That's good. Like, I can understand that like having some kind of power cast because it kind of has like a mini game to get to the power level where you have to mark your opponent, right? It is not that difficult when you have flick knives and and the daggers, but it's still a mini game. Your opponent can prevent the damage or do something surprising. I do think that Bonds by itself is a very problematic card, right? You need to, if you have certain cards in your hand that are central to your game plan, you need to block with them. For example, if you're playing Brute, like we're talking about fair decks versus unfair decks that do some very unfair things in a while. Brutes are usually only doing unfair things when they play Blood-Brass Bellow. If they play a Bonds of Agony and you have a Blood-Brass Bellow in your hand and you cannot properly block this, most of the time you will block with your Blood-Brass Bellow to prevent the other two from being pulled from your deck. The problematic of this is when your opponent attacks you with random stealth attack and then goes on, throws the dagger, plays Take Up the Mantle, turns into a Bond, and you cannot do anything else. You take the damage, you lose all of the power cast in your deck, and you have essentially lost the game at this point because you will not be able to do any unfair things during the course of this game. And I believe at a local player like level, this was devastating. like not being able to play your deck or do anything, and you cannot like properly play around this play. You cannot be always overblocking any stealth attack in case there's a Take Up the Mantle in there. And I believe it also like kind of goes against like the idea of Flesh and Blood being a game where you will not lose to a single card being played at a specific moment, right? A game where you will be trading blows back and forth. And I do think that Take Up the Mantle was a very problematic card with bonds. It is still a very powerful card. Will still allow some very, very interesting stuff. And I'm surprised because I thought bonds was going to stay, and if any of those two cards would get banned, it was Take Up the Mantle. But I believe this could probably be better for the long-term health of the game.
Cool. I could definitely see that. Tariq, I want to come back to your point about 2025 Flesh and Blood needing your deck needing to check a box where you have a significantly overrate turn, which I have to say, I think you put it very, very succinctly. The way I used to think about it was just every deck needs to have some sort of spike turn. Like, it feels like the game's gone a little spikier. Not necessarily that the overall power level has gone down. It used to be the case where, say, your Fi would play a Belittle every other turn, and then somewhere else they have an Art of War. There's constantly having good overrate turns. And now it's like the average turn has gone down, but like the spike of it has gone really high. It'll be like a mantle into a bonds, or something like Traverse Mirror guy, like you brought up as well. Do you think Slippy can find that in maybe the Savor Bloodshed, Kiss of Death type stuff, which it kind of already did have? But I would argue some of those turns were also could be quite spiky as well, especially if it also involved, like, say, a Take Up the Mantle into a Kiss of Death that they already blocked a card on, and then you can T-Tox it, something like that. Do you feel like that's viable enough to maybe let Slippy stay? I mean, I'll obviously be taking a peg down, but I think it's viable enough to let him stay a force in the metagame?
I do think for sure it's still going to be a force in the metagame. Any time where you punish people for blocking, it's a very powerful effect in Flesh and Blood because you're working with unilateral information. You know what you have, your opponent doesn't know what they have. Even when you go back to some of the older assassins, what's the one that puts the exile card face down? I'm horrible with names. The one that Shoma won with.
Uzuri?
Azuri, thank you. Even with Azuri, for a long time I was trying to make Azuri work, and you get a lot of equity just because your opponent doesn't know if you have a Command and Conquer or doesn't know if you have an on-hit, 6 power in your hand, so they have to overblock in a lot of ways. So Slippy will always be, have that assassin bonus where it's representing a combat trick, it's representing a pump, and your opponent has to miss block or block in a poor way. And if you have no arsenal, you can even just arsenal even if you do have the trick. So it'll still be a force in the sense that it has a couple things going for it. It has unconditional go again in its hero power, and it has still above rate cards like you said, Savor Bloodshed plus Mark plus Tarantula Toxin. So it will probably still continue to exist. Reading Ellis's article, I echo kind of what they say and what you said. It does create a negative play experience, and Pablo highlighted that too, especially on the local level. Modern age game design, they kind of move away from those effects where people aren't able to play the game. When they want you to do powerful things, they want it to be on your side. So like, I'm going to do my cool thing. My opponent goes, they're going to do their cool thing. And it leads to a fun experience. Now, from a player point of view, that's not really my job to worry about. I still have fun, if I am getting, recurrently discarded or whatever. But for the average player experience, I understand why they're doing it. And I think that what their thought process is, if they nerf the top 2 decks, then it'll probably just flatten out and it'll still probably be viable without being oppressive. And that's what I would have to guess is their thought process and logic on that one.
Cool. Speaking of top 2 decks, just before we go into Gravy, I just want to touch on Mario real quick. Tariq, you did bring them up, I should say. Any hope for this deck now? I think there were some rumblings that Mario was a player in the previous metagame, sort of occupying a similar spot as like Fang, where it's you're like good into Slippy, and then you can like find a game plan to Gravy, and you're still good into like the other aggressive decks that were trying to target Gravy. Well, now with Gravy ostensibly being taken down a peg, Slippy taken down a peg, and Mario themselves getting hit by the Bonds of Agony ban, any hope for this hero, or do you think they just need to wait for an expansion slot card maybe, or some sort of upgrade, maybe from the Slippy Armory deck even? Tariq, let's start with you.
No, I think there's hope for this hero for sure. Again, I'm going to get the mask wrong, but the mask that lets you choose what your assassin is, and then being able to put it on like a Kiss of Death, for example, and then you spike it and then able to flick it. It does check that box where you have a power turn spike that does something unfair or extremely above rate. And you can take it one step further where it has that kind of mystic hero element where because of the mask you can choose to when you want to do it. It doesn't require multiple cards to kind of set up in motion. So in that regard, I think Marionette does check a box that it's doing something powerful. It's on the relatively easier side to kind of set up. It has potential in a lot of ways. Um, a lot's going to change with this metagame, especially with Gravy taking a hit, Slippy taking a hit. I don't think it's dead in the water. It definitely took a nerf, but it will still be viable. A lot of the assassin cards are very high on rate. Codex of Frailty plus Leave No Witnesses is the best one card combo in the game. It still has access to that. So it's definitely still a player, and I think we have a lot of work to do as players going into Worlds, trying to figure out where it exactly fits in the metagame.
Pablo, any thoughts on Mario?
I'm not as hopeful, I believe, on Mario's place in the meta game. I do think this is a very big hit, a very, very big hit for the deck. And we will get into the discussion of Gravy later, but I do think that the only problem Mario did really have on this metagame was the Gravy matchup, which was incredibly bad. And I do think that Gravy left this banner restricted list being much better than Mario did. Like I believe the hit that Gravy took is less important than the one Mario had to suffer. But we will see. We will see. I believe also that Marionette was probably a hero that was underexplored. Like I could be totally surprised with a new build or some new tech cards being used. And as you have said, Assassin does have some incredible bombs in their card pool. So I wouldn't be surprised if people found something. But with the deck list I have seen recently, I wouldn't be like that surprised to see Mario like disappearing from the top eights from the tournaments.
Sounds good. Okay, so we have foreshadowed it enough. We've mentioned Gravy about like 50 times already. It's time to move on and talk about our pirate necromancer who had Tipple red and yellow banned, which significantly cuts down his gold generation, because not only is it cutting effectively 6 pieces of gold in the deck, it's also taking away each free hook activation that comes with those 6 pieces of gold being activated. So I estimate it probably takes away around maybe 10 gold over the course of the game, depending on what they replace the Tipples with, obviously. That could change things, but ostensibly that's what it does. And also takes away quite a bit of the deck velocity. Again, I mean, if Lone Truck, say, is like the replacement, you don't get the same deck velocity as you do with Golden Topple. You don't get a free discard outlet in that as well. Now, I believe both of you played Gravy at Singapore, I want to say. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. So
Smart
definitely.
people.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the a lot of the players at the highest level were saying like, I think, there's no reason to not play Gravy, and I heard some people say they felt like they were just forced to play Gravy. Pablo, let's start with you on your thoughts regarding the Tipple red and yellow ban.
It is a big hit for sure because I don't think this changes how Gravy wants to play the aggro matchups, especially. I don't think it will be like very important on the more mid-rangey or slower games. I believe you will still do fine and great into those decks. Let's not forget that Fearless Confrontation was released in the last set, and it is quite a problematic card. Sometimes it wins you the game on the spot. So I think he will still be doing very good. The problem is that Tipple was a glue card for this deck. It did several things that you wanted, right? It did damage to your opponent. It generated gold so you could activate your hook, and it was also a discard outlet, right? And there is no single card that can fit all these 3 checkboxes at the same time. So I believe most Gravy players will be forced to play Loanshark, any kind of gold generating attack. Maybe you will need to use your rams on some attacks, like hand attacks on the turns. I believe that the whole deck philosophy will have to change a little bit, which I suspect is LSS idea when doing this ban. I also think that Tipple was a pretty overtuned card. Like right off the bat, I believe we were seeing all decks playing 6 of them, and then they later evolved to playing all 9 of them because the card was simply just way too good, right? It did too many things at the same time, and I don't think that it is great that Gravy is not as dominating as he was before. I'm pretty sure he will still be one of the top decks of the metagame. I'm 100% sure.
I used to call Tipple like the Art of War in Gravy, like the same way Art of War in Chain, because it felt very similar. Where the banish in Chain was just fake because you're gonna play the card anyway. That's kind of what Tipple felt like to me. Like you're not actually discarding anything; you're just gonna play the ally later anyway, and you're just drawing a card and starting damage at your opponent. It felt very Art of War-esque to me. Tariq, what are your thoughts on the Tipple bans?
Yeah, before I get into it, can you hear me okay? My mic's kind of cutting in and out, so as long as you can hear me okay.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, perfect. So, I mean, first of all, I agree with you. It does really feel like an Art of War-like card in the deck, just from a mathematical sense, right? Tipple costs 1 resource to play. You're making a gold out of it. When if you draw a blue, you functionally get that resource back. So on a just a mathematical point of view, it's like a 0 card 3 or a 0 card 2. And over the course of the game, that's extremely powerful. I disagree with Pablo in the sense that I think it actually hurts you more in the longer games, games that want to go longer, because you have less damage over time that aren't built in your allies. And yes, if your opponents are kind of playing this weird mid-range style, like let's say Florian, or a deck that's not really trying to fatigue you, it probably won't make too much of a difference because your allies will just accrue enough value over time to get you over the finish. But where it will hurt you the most are decks that are trying to like dedicate fatigue you, like Jarl or even some Talishar Verdances, that the loss of damage over time, loss of free damage or from attacks over time will probably add up over the course of the game, and you might get fatigued a little bit, quicker. Definitely agree with Pablo that the deck's just going to change in the way it looks. It's probably going to look completely different. Maybe less allies, more attacks to kind of make up that difference. We're still in the kind of the weird experimental phase where now we have to learn what its identity is in the metagame. But it's an interesting change for sure. Just to take a step back and talk about kind of the picture of the ban overall, I was actually kind of surprised about it because I think this ban I would have preferred it, in 4 to 5 months, maybe even after Worlds, because I think this metagame was still being fleshed out too. I think the ban was almost a nod to Super Slam being a very Guardian heavy set, and they maybe want those cards to be a little bit more playable than they otherwise would have been if Gravy still played full power. I'm just saying it as it is because, if you look at the metagame, it was actually fairly balanced. We saw Gravy do very well in the North American calling, and then kind of drop off a little bit when they went to the European calling as the metagame kind of evolved. You saw a bunch of other decks that kind of started popping up as Cilio, Fang, Slippy. I'll talk to a lot of Slippies. I think their Gravy matchup is just fine, close to 50-50. And there's also a little bit of a bias where, a lot of the best players in the world were playing Gravy. So naturally, if all the best players play a single deck, that deck's also going to have an extremely high or good conversion, I should say, at a PT or a calling or whatever kind of event at that level. So I would have personally liked to see the metagame flush out a little bit more. Off the top of my head as a Gravy player, I wouldn't be thrilled to play into a Prism, a Fang, a Kasai, because Kasai is getting a new card, a Cilio. There's several matchups that aren't actually that good for Gravy. And, maybe Gravy in its final iteration, whatever that does look like, ends up being too powerful and you need to take a step back. But I do think the bannings may have been a bit premature, at least from my perspective. I know Michael Fung, I remember him saying relatively recently that Gravy's had a good run. It's had like 2 to 3 months of play. You can play the deck and he doesn't mind it, seeing it taken down a notch. I disagree with that take a little bit. I would have liked to see how the metagame evolved, because part of that fun to me is seeing how people respond, but anyways, I digress. We are here now. It's definitely a big hit to its power level. A lot of its free damage got taken away, and it does still have, the key weaknesses that it had before, where, sometimes it can be susceptible to fatigue. So we'll have to see kind of how people change and how the deck changes going forward.
So we are... Okay. We are all about digressing on Arsenal Pass here, so we're just going to run with that tangent a little bit and then come back to how Gravy might switch after the bans. I just want to expand on that a little bit, because I have to say, I pushed back a little bit on that take as well, that Gravy wasn't too strong and like maybe could have survived in a few months. And I wonder how much of this is... We spoke about this on the pod last week, actually, the changes in the LL point system. Like, if Gravy was sitting at 320 points, as he should have been, this, like, 3 months after its release, less than 3 months after its release, is it like, can we actually say, oh no, the deck didn't need a hit at all? Like, what are your thoughts on like that aspect of it?
Like you're saying, it's winning too much and therefore needed a nerf. Is that?
Well, yeah. Well, basically, I mean, I think I guess you were saying that the metagame's still being fleshed out a little bit. So I guess to me, it's like it's a bit of an alarm bell going off that he's sitting at should be at 320 in 3 months, and I think the fact that he's been at 160 instead makes it a lot easier to ignore the power level of the deck and maybe posit that the deck doesn't need a hit. And I'm curious to hear whether that's maybe affecting people's perception on whether the deck needed a ban or not.
So look, there's two big things. One, there's always going to be a best deck. I say this ad nauseum, and I don't want to be that person that said it, but if it's not gravy, it's going to be something else. I think a combination of a lot of people that are very talented at this game in North America and throughout the world have jumped on this deck helps that fact, right? And then two, I in general think that permanent based decks in Flesh and Blood are a little bit too good because being restricted on action points to deal with something that your opponent has already done is a big cost when you're a non-permanent based hero. But with that being said, I do think there were several decks that in the metagame could beat Gravy. Yes, it was probably the best deck, or Slippy, were 1 and 2. I've heard people argue both sides of it. One of those two decks being the best deck. Yes, it was the best deck. Would it be a problem 4 or 5 months from now? Probably. Are they doing it because there's a new set being released? That's what I think is likely. I personally would just have liked to see maybe another couple months of Gravy just to see how this metagame fully flushed out. Because as a player, I think there was still like an Acilio arc or maybe a Fang arc to have happened. And I don't think we'll see that now. Super Slam's going to come in and we're just going to get completely, different metagame. Completely fine if you disagree with me or are okay with that complete reset. Obviously, LSS believes they're okay wiping the slate clean and restarting the Super Slam. More than okay with that. I was more commenting just as a player. There's always going to be a best deck. I think the metagame was, still to be flushed out, but it is what it is at this point. And my job as the player is just to, make the best decision now going forward with what decks are available.
That's fair. I definitely do agree that I think it's reasonable to think that some level of this ban was perhaps targeted towards the fact that we have a set coming out that's all Brute and Guardian, and I do wonder whether the Verdance Plume ban also fits into that a little bit. Pablo, do you have any thoughts on what we just discussed?
Yeah, I wanted to touch it up on 2 points really quickly. One, I do think that Gravy was overtuned. Like, I was so surprised when after Enigma finally left the game, so outrageously powerful. We got another new hero that had permanence on board. Okay, we trust in LSS that needs to do a little side quest to play those permanents. Okay, and it is playing blue cards, same as Enigma. They will not have repeated the mistake of giving them extremely powerful blue cards. They did. I was so mad when Gravy dropped. I do think that it was a little bit too powerful, and while it had a lot of randomness during the first few turns of the game, it did completely remove any randomness on the other turns because of the gold generation. The fact that you can play 32, 35 blues and have enough free gold during the game because you are not working towards getting that gold. I have to remind you guys of the cards we were playing to get gold before this set, like +3, and if I hit, I can get a gold. If not, you get the gold, or things like that, right? And now we will have cards that completely freely generated. I do think that the deck had too much power and too many answers to the different things. Like, my God, we were winning against Syndra. Like, how can that be? Like, that deck should always be winning against you. And I do think that the deck was slightly overtuned. And the other point is, I truly think that the release of Super Slam can impact how the game is being balanced. It would be very bad optics if we had Mastery Pack Guardian, Super Slam, Armored Pleiades, and no Guardian is good in the metagame. It would be very, very
Yeah, that's fair. It's funny, Mastery Pack Guardian, I think people's main takeaway from that is the card you brought up, Pablo, is just Fearless Confrontation seems to be the biggest impact from that set. So definitely agree with you on the optics part. So coming back to, well, the gold generation in Gravy, both of you mentioned that you think the deck fundamentally changes. And I was a little curious. I think some people are trying out maybe just replacing the tipples with obviously less powerful versions of a similar effect. So Swindler's Grift is an example some people are thinking about. Is 2 for 6 with no go again. Stuff like more jittery and restless bones. So if you're going the Swindler's Grift route, you probably need to use rum on that kind of effect, like what you were saying, Tariq. Or if you're going the bones route, that's like your discard outlet, but you need something else to maybe help you create gold. So like Loan Shark to go along with that. That is definitely in the realm of you're just trying to find replacements for Tipple spread across like 2 different copies of cards. But I think both of you are suggesting, like, do you all think that that's a potentially viable way for the deck to move forward? Or do you think is that you're saying where it's like a lot of stuff around it needs to change and the whole deck will look very, very different than what we've come to expect the past few months? Pablo, let's start with you.
I think that more cards other than the 6 that you're going to replace the Tipples with are going to change. Like the number of allies is a variant. I think that needs to vary. I don't know the change, right? I was looking for the word, right? Sorry. And I think that needs to change if you change the other cards in your deck. Different number of allies lead to different strategies. And I do think we will probably see strategies, as Tariq mentioned, more centered around playing your attack actions and not dumping an ally on board every single turn. Maybe we will be left with the more powerful ones, because that's another interesting thing about Gravy. Like there are like 9 really good allies, and then the other ones. So I don't know. I don't know, because we're still very, very early in the exploration phase of this new Gravy deck. But I'm thinking that the deck will see significantly bigger changes. It could also lead to the deck blocking much better, because we're removing 2 blocks, and we will probably be adding cards that allow you to discard those allies. Maybe more Blood on the Waters, maybe more 3 blocks in the form of, as you have mentioned, any discard outlets for these allies. So I believe the deck will see a fundamental change, and it will not play the same as the Gravy decks we have seen till this point.
Tariq, any thoughts?
I agree with Pablo. Just to kind of build on it too, it has to be different, because if you look at why gravy ducks are the anatomy that they are, it's built around Golden Tipple, right? Most lists are playing between 15 to 17 allies in every matchup, because 15 into 60 is about 1 in 4 cards as an ally. So the idea being you want to have an ally every turn to either dump with Tipple or dump with a gold token that you draw. So, obviously when you're building a deck around Tipple and then Tipple gets banned, the whole anatomy starting from scratch will be completely different. I agree with Pablo that the deck probably won't exist in a more aggressive fashion, because early gold generation will be even harder to come by. And anybody that's played Gravy, the older iteration, will note that your most susceptible turns are in the first couple turns if you don't have a gold on board or you draw no allies. So you're going to have to rebuild the deck without Tipples in mind, probably better block value, like Pablo said, maybe even defense reactions, and kind of playing a slower game until you kind of get an ally or 2 in the graveyard. And then I'm sure once you kind of get that, engine going, it'll feel very similar to old Gravy. You just won't have that automatic start like you did with Tipples before.
Speaking of automatic starts, I want to talk a little bit about a hero that got some splash damage, which was also mentioned in the article as well. I believe both of you have had experience brewing Marlin. I think both of you actually tried it. Well, what are your takes on, I guess, how Marlin gets affected? Because at least in my brews of Marlin, Tipple to me was a sideboard card. It was there for Gravy. I know some people liked it as like a main board card. But to me, I mean, exactly what you're saying, Tariq, where I think what she's lacking is actually just that start, the ignition piece, to get the gold train going. And Tipple wasn't it. Tipple's one of those cards that you want when you already have a gold. To me, it's a gold payoff card, at least in Marlin, compared to Gravy. So curious to hear y'all's thoughts on... and we won't spend too long on this, because Marlin's obviously not a very prominent hero in the metagame. But yeah, Tariq, let's start with you. What do you think of the splash damage for Marlin?
I think, like you said, it wasn't really a key card in Marlin's game plan. At least the build I was playing was more built around really powerful on hits, the harpoons that would then take away your opponent's turn. The incidental value that you got from Marlin, or from Tipple, excuse me, was kind of the opposite of Gravy. Because in Marlin, I kind of view it as a payoff for having gold. You then get to dump the harpoon you make from it into an extra card, where Gravy was more of an enabler. So in Marlin, I felt like it was kind of just win more, and it was on its way out because it didn't block as well. Your primary gear plan was just kind of hitting with a harpoon. So ultimately, I don't think it changes Marlin's fundamental game plan because it was doing the opposite as in Gravy. I think it was more of a payoff card than an enabler.
And it also, because it was the payoff, it also, like what I found for it and why I moved it to the sideboard just against Gravy as a go again piece was because it kind of conflicted with your other payoff, which is Big Game Trophy Shot, right? You can only use one of them per turn because Marlin's a tap ability. And so when you draw like double Golden Tipple or Tipple at Big Game Trophy Shot, you always had to give one of them up. And it kind of just never felt good. And at a certain point, I was like, I have too many gold payoffs and not enough gold generators, which I think is the problem that both Marlin and Puffin face because they didn't have the equivalent of Tipple to Gravy, where the gold generator is is an enabler, whereas in this one, Marlin and Puffin, they both just like struggling to make the first piece of gold. Pablo, what are your thoughts on the Marlin side of things regarding Golden Tipple?
I did like Golden Tipple in the deck. I believe my view was significantly different from you guys. I did not work that much after the initial exploration of the set. I did not attempt to bring her to any big tournament. Sadly, she did show some very early signs of having inconsistencies, very big inconsistencies in the deck. I actually love how LSS addressed this problem. Like, yeah, we know that Marlin is taking splash damage. Don't worry, the deck was bad. It needed more things to work. It was actually hilarious, and I think it's a good way to calm. Yeah, we know this deck is taking some splash damage. Don't worry, because it is in the root. We will design new cards taking this in mind, and I think that's the way to go about it. It's sad that the deck is taking some the fall for other deck being too powerful. We have seen that with Katsu as well, but I don't think it was necessary to ban Golden Tipple. It was the most obvious, easy ban to keep Gravy on check. And I'm sad for Marlin fans out there. You will get your time on this spot, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that time can't come soon enough for sure. Now, before we move on to Plume, just a quick question: do y'all think this is enough to bring Gravy down into maybe a little bit more of an acceptable power? Actually, so Pablo, you mentioned you thought Gravy was overtuned. Tariq, I'm not entirely sure if we got your opinion on that aspect of it. I think you were talking about the metagame getting fleshed out a little bit, but love to hear your thoughts on, I guess, whether he was overtuned and if he was like, does this Golden Tipple ban, do you think it's enough to bring him down to a little bit of an acceptable power level? Because he still has Chart the High Seas and Swell with Back-Alley Breakline, still has access to, that side of stuff, which was, I think, in many people's eyes, the enablers for his massive ceiling turns, which gave him the feel of a deck that was able to race the Syndras, which is a deck that he should be losing to every time. So curious to hear your thoughts on that. Is this ban enough?
Yeah. So I obviously agree with Pablo. I do think it was the best deck in the format, as evidenced by me playing it at the Pro Tour and then subsequently convincing my friends to play it at the Callings. There's no doubt that I personally believed it was the best deck. Other people, going into the PT were telling me that Slippy was actually favored into it. So there was, community discourse on, Slippy being the best deck versus Gravy. I'm not going to comment on that. I do think 90-90 matchups are good for the game because that means there is some level of play. And my Slippy versus Gravy matchup was actually one of the most fun ones I've had. I actually really enjoyed that matchup from both sides. Do I think it's enough to bring it down? I'm going to answer that with a funny little story. So after the Pro Tour, a lot of our group, didn't end up on Gravy, and they're all like, "Oh, you're right. We'll play Gravy at Worlds. We're going to listen, blah blah blah." And I said, "Look, here's what's going to happen. Gravy's going to go and it's going to win the next North American calling. Everybody's going to say it's broken. Then they're going to ban something, most likely Tipple from it. People are going to think the deck is dead, and then it's going to go on and win Worlds anyway." So 2 out of my 3 predictions are correct. Whether the third one is going to be correct, I don't know. Tipple was a big part of the deck. And like I said, there were already, in my opinion, exploitable flaws in Gravy that existed before that Fang took advantage of, Syndra took advantage of, Acilio took advantage of, Fatigue Jarl took advantage of. So decks were already kind of adapting to kind of hit Gravy where it hurts. It's not getting anything, and those problems still exist. Whether it's going to still be viable for Worlds, I think has more to do with what the metagame around it looks like. And if it does do well, I think it'll be more of a metagame call, or because, X amount of matchups end up being good or Y end up being bad, more than, yes, this deck is fundamentally, super powerful like it was before.
Pablo, your thoughts on that?
I do think that the deck has taken a big hit, but I don't know if winning the Worlds, but I do think he's going to perform well. 100% sure. I believe the deck still does fundamentally unfair things. Each time that you're playing one of your allies, you're essentially playing overvalue over the value that you should have, and then there's ways of like extending that value over turns. And I also think that most people will take this ban as the death of Gravy. And my death has been greatly exaggerated. I do think that a lot of people will show up with Foreign and will have a very, very bad time when they get run over by a Gravy.
It's so interesting hearing so many of the reactions to this from the Gravy players, because I don't know about you guys, but in at least our team's early builds of Gravy, they weren't even on the full 9 tipples. They were sort of oscillating between 4 and 6. And we already were like, this deck is very, very strong, even with just 6 tipples. So now it's come down to 3, and I'm kind of like, I feel like the deck's still probably going to be strong, people. Moving on to another fundamentally unfair thing. Let's talk about the Plume of Evergrowth ban. Now, I think this means that Verdance basically needs to work a little bit harder for her combo game plan. A big part of Plume was that it sort of made the combo game plan very free, regardless of variance or regardless of your opponent disrupting you at the wrong time, because you just always had access to one of those pieces in your yard. It was a lot easier to execute the combo game plan. Now you can actually get on the bad side of variance, where your rampant growths are in awkward spaces in your deck. You can't exactly, it's not slow enough that you can actually fully pitch stack it if you see it very early in the game. And you also can't just dump one in the yard and find it later. Or you can get disrupted on the wrong turn when you've set it up in your arsenal and they send a CNC at you, you're holding D-Rex or something, and you can actually lose it. And when it's gone permanently. The question I have though, is this actually enough to make the slower decks into Verdance playable? Or is it just one of those cases where it went from 5% to 15%, and so it doesn't actually change whether you can bring something like a Florin or something like a Guardian to an event if Verdance is prominent? Tariq, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I actually really like this ban. I think this is a perspective from the devs that they identified a problem going forward and they addressed it before it became a toxic issue. So to answer your first question, no, I don't think it will fundamentally change Verdance's endgame against slower decks. It'll be a little bit more annoying, and Verdance players may go find themselves in time trouble a little bit more. But I think they will eventually be able to combo out a slower deck that's trying to deterministically fatigue them. So their very end game, I don't think it actually affects that. I think what this issue does solve is the new card that's being printed, the Leaves. I don't remember the full name, but it's essentially, for those who don't know, it's a 2-for-6 arcane damage card. And what it ended up doing, so you spent 3 resources to deal 6 arcane to the face. But the key part is it had subtype Earth. So what ended up happening, or what it would have done, is any time that Verdance got you sub 10 life, or I guess 8 life in this case, minus how much arcane barrier you had, you'd functionally just be dead to 2 blue spells at any point in the game, because it would allow you to go pitch a blue to plume back the 6 damage arcane, use the boots to deal 6 arcane to the face, and then activate Waning Moon off of just blues. You didn't need to draw anything. So it would basically make the wizard endgame almost deterministic. And I think LSS saw that coming, and they wanted this kind of battle mage kind of hero available, and they wanted a mix of arcane and attacks, and they wanted all this to happen. And I think Plume was just the card kind of standing in their design space, and they're like, hey, we're just going to axe this. We're going to make the hero into what we envisioned it to be. But, this was a little bit too powerful. And I kind of agree with them. Imagining, anytime you fall below 10 life or whatever, you're just at risk of dying to just blues. So I kind of like the ban. I don't think anybody's collection has significantly gone down in value by banning Plume. So I think overall it's a positive change. It probably doesn't change too much on how Verdance approaches the slower matchups that are trying to fatigue it.
I like the ban too. I do feel like she was especially with Gravy taking a hit, I was starting to feel like I'm not sure what this deck's weakness is anymore. Like Syndra a little bit, Prism a little bit, but not quite enough for her to not just be de facto best deck. And we mentioned the pod when we were discussing what bans should happen, where like Verdance probably needs a hit as well for sure. Pablo, what are your thoughts on the Plume ban?
I also like the ban. We have a saying in the Sunflower Samurai, where the most problematic cards usually have either an effect that has no limit, kind of Art of War, which gives +1 to any card you're playing during this turn, or recursion. And that was what Plume of Evergrowth was doing. It did set off all of the alarms when we first saw the card. I do think that it is very problematic, as Tariq has mentioned, with the new spell. It is incredibly powerful, and it was telling the fact that they were preferring to play the zero defense headpiece over anything else, even if it was just for bringing back one falling off the crown during the middle of the game. I also kind of very much hated when randomly you died to a turn 5 or 6 triple a rampant growth out of nowhere with a sigil or something, and you're like, this is supposed to happen later in the game, right? We reached this final stage of the game. Maybe this should happen. Sometimes you just got blasted off for like 20 in turn 3 or something like that, and you felt like the game escaped completely off of your control. So I believe it's a good ban. I believe it was a highly problematic card that had like branching issues, like branching problems, where it could be like very, very deterministic. And I do think that Verdance having to play a little bit safer into her combo also offers some opportunities to slower decks to disrupt her enough to get some time to kill her, or at least pressure her into using like some of the e-pods or something. I don't know, but I believe it leads to a much healthier game.
Mm-hmm. And it's also nice that this didn't really have any splash damage either, because it's not like Florian was like playing Plume at all, right?
Well, right now at least.
Yeah.
I believe most people were on Plume like on past Pro Tours, but yeah, I don't think there were any like decklists playing it now.
So speaking of Florian, we're going to move on and talk about Florian real quick before coming back to talk a big game. Germinate unbanned. So definitely, Florian kind of fell off the face of the earth after High Seas dropped. I mean, I guess kind of technically after Germinate was banned the first time. But I do feel like it was more High Seas dropping that kind of just sent him away permanently. And perhaps even new LLing. Because where I want to start this discussion off with like Florian's place in metagame, now that he has Germinate back, is I think when he was prominent, a big reason to play him over Verdance was that he had the much better new matchup. Verdance was really bad into new, and Florian was very good into new. So you could play Florian after Enigma was gone, and that's your better Earth hero. Now with new firmly gone, I have been struggling to find a reason why someone would want to play Florian over Verdance, which still makes me question his place in the metagame despite him getting Germinate back. I'm curious to hear both of y'all's thoughts on that. Pablo, let's start with you.
I actually do welcome this unban. I don't think Germinate is a problematic card at all. It is a very powerful piece for the end game, which I believe that deck is missing, and I believe that's like a slow deck should have some kind of firepower on the end stages of the game. I think that there is a problem with Everbloom Life, which does combo with the Germinate quite a lot. I believe that card is very problematic, and as I have said earlier, I believe recursion is a thing that probably should be like highly analyzed. And I believe both card combinations might be a little tad too good into some decks. But I don't think Germinate is bad as it is now. I don't think Florian will be like the defining deck of the metagame or whatever. He needs to deal with both Gravy and Verdance. And the Verdance matchup is looking really rough. really, really rough.
Yeah, despite Plume going away, I think it's exactly what...
Yeah. I don't think you have enough like ability to push damage, so she can like drop the combo early or whatever. I believe she can just survive till third cycle or whatever and just blast you off the face of the earth.
Yeah, that's what Tariq was saying, right? The end game of Verdance into the slow decks hasn't really changed much, despite Plume going away. Tariq, do you have thoughts on Florian's place in the metagame now with Germinate coming back?
Yes, I do. And I don't like the Germinate changes, the first one or the second one. And I'll explain why. For all the cloud and parops that I gave the devs for the Plume of Evergrowth Foresight, I take it all back for what they've been doing to Germinate. First of all, that card never needed to be banned in the first place. Like they needed to read the room and understand why Florian was good in the first place, and it would have changed with how Gradient interacted with the metagame. And I don't think it needed to be banned in the first place. But now that we're here and it was banned, I agree with you guys. I don't think it really has a chance against Verdance, or it'll have a lot of problems. But I don't like the unbanning either, because if you're releasing a Guardian set that wants to go the distance, Florian is almost a better Guardian in a lot of ways, right? It plays like a Guardian. And it gets access to some of the best D-reacts and some of the best attacks in Felling of the Crown and Plow Under. But then it also now has this unbeatable late game card. And that's a blue, and it also blocks 3, and it's an earth. I just don't understand like where their head is at here, where it's like you're releasing a Guardian set, presumably it's going to go the distance, and we're giving this Earth Hero this unbeatable tool for any Guardian deck that's trying to take a game long. Because historically, and this is kind of tangential here, but here we go. Guardian gets incremental value over time by like blocking optimally, and they need some sort of weapon or value piece that accrues value over game. And previously, that was Winter's Wail. So for me, the minute Winter's Wail was banned, the Guardian archetype kind of became tier 2 for forever, because it lost its ability to accrue offensive incremental value over time. Blocking alone in Flesh and Blood is not good enough unless you're going to deterministically fatigue someone. Okay, so now maybe the new set, it's not fully spoiled. Guardian will have this incremental, offensive value that will overtake Germinate, but I find that hard to believe because Earth Heroes in general block so well, they get enough value over their attacks. And now they brought back probably the most oppressive anti-endgame fatigue card. And to me, Germany kind of falls in this box of Drone of Brutality, where, if it's playable, it's not necessarily a good thing, right? I don't think it's adding anything to the play experience except for the most, toxic experiences, which is like, I'm going to take this game extremely long, then I'm going to play this card, once your deck is all blues, and I can never lose. So in that regard, I don't like it. Maybe the perspective is, it's an anti-fatigue tool, so people will be less incentivized to build Guardian decks as fatigue. Maybe that's the logic, but I don't understand it. You're releasing a Guardian set and then you're getting back a whole, I don't know. Anyways, there's my rant. You can do with it what you want.
So, well, first I'm going to thank you for that. That was awesome. But I'm curious, why then were you against the ban in the first place? Then, like, you said you didn't like the banning of it either, and
I just don't think it was needed, right? Like, I don't think Florian was very good. But then once you banned it, in my head, I thought that was their thought process. They're like, okay, this is just a talk, like a bad end game card. We're releasing another blue earth, great, we'll just do this instead. That's where I thought their head was at, and then they unbanned it, and I'm like, well, was it the first thing or the second thing? Like, I don't really understand, where their heads at. There probably is a reason. I'm just not privy to it. So
got it. So coming back to, I guess, the qualms regarding, okay, a Guardian set's coming out, and Florian has this thing that's a better Guardian. I mean, so it sounds like I'm implying you think Florian has a place in his upcoming metagame. Is that, or is that something I'm completely misreading? Like, do you think he exists with Verdance and Gravy still around?
No.
Okay,
no,
cool.
I don't. Maybe he just needed a weird buff. I was just, no, I agree with what you and Pablo said. I think it has fundamental issues, fundamental flaws. But let's say a world exists where, Guardian fixes its Verdance problem and Verdance, for whatever reason, isn't a deck. I just think it's weird to give, a hero this unbeatable endgame card back. I just don't understand really what it's adding to it, because I do think Florian could already beat, long decks or decks that were trying to fatigue it without Germinate. It's one of those unbans that I'm just not sure like why it happened or like what issue it's trying to address. Are they just trying to boost its power level, or is it an optic thing? They just want to get cards off the ban list. I'm just saying I don't fully understand why it was banned in the first place, and I don't fully understand why it's back now. That's all I was saying.
I see. I think maybe if please let me know if this is a fair way to put it. I think the read I'm getting is that Germinate almost automatically de facto makes Florian the best Guardian, and there's a Guardian set coming out, so you're kind of not exactly seeing the reason for that. Is that maybe a unique way to put it?
It makes it the best late game hero, I think, that's doing fair things. Now, if there's a Guardian that does unfair things, that's different. But the problem is, I'm trepidatious about a Guardian doing unfair things because then it becomes a Starvo type thing. Because Guardian's already the best deck at blocking and accruing incremental value. Now, the minute you give it offensive potential, which I'm sure we're going to go with the next card that you kind of skipped over, it just does it becomes a problem because then it's great on both ends of the spectrum here. But yeah, I was just commenting. I would love to hear more analysis and thought process on why Germinate was banned in the first place, and then why it got brought back like down deep. But I don't think Florian's going to be some meta breaking deck or whatever. I just thought it's just a fun little thought experiment as to why they would do things. And, I don't think it's going to be consequential in any way. It was very amusing.
Mm-hmm. Although, as we are sitting here.
Just to give another point of one of the things that I did really like seeing on this panel list was Brian mentioning how live services have changed how we approach to bans in TCGs. And I do think that maybe this ban has to do a little bit with how they approach banning in games as League of Legends, where they will give a buff to a hero, and then it represents a massive upgrade in people playing it and that hero success, and that does not correlate with the buff or the nerf that hero has gotten. I believe that might be the way of LSS of saying, hey, Florian is here, play Florian, right? And if they do this kind of much more aggressive ban unrestricted list, will move it around different pieces, I don't think that's fair. Maybe they just want to shake up things a little bit and remind people of the potential Florian has.
I really like that point. It is surprising how just community perception of a deck getting a buff, or a hero, as you speak about, in maybe a MOBA, just getting a buff, whether or not the buff is consequential enough to make it playable, just spikes its play rate to the point, and sometimes even win rate if a good enough player picks it up. To that point, I feel like Germinate is a very weird unbanning, but I don't think it's the text on the card itself that's actually going to potentially make Florian a force in his metagame. It's just the Blue Earth block 3, where it feels like now they want to do the Channel Mount Heroic stuff instead of digging at the bottom of the barrel to actually pull off some sort of aggressive strategy. They kind of have this piece back, which just lets them fuel the rest of their aggressive game plan a little bit stronger. And I do feel like that's potentially the only way I see him coming back into the metagame. I don't know whether either of you have thoughts on that aspect of it.
I've said it ad nauseum at this point, but I think something fundamentally would have to change with some of the top decks right now for Florian to really come back. But yeah, Pablo, I don't know. Do you have a differing opinion?
No, I wholeheartedly agree with this one. I believe he needs more than he needs to do something different than what he's actually doing. Yep. I don't think there's an easy way to fix his shortcomings.
All right, let's move on to the last ban in CC. Talk a big game. So I have to admit, I read this as oh, okay, cool. I don't know the whole set. I don't know how any hero in this set abuses it. They're doing a preemptive ban, which I'm a big fan of. Sort of the needles and the stubby hammers. That was just in Blitz back then. But I do enjoy when they're okay, let's just not have a degenerate pocket meta for a little bit, especially if they know it's already degenerate. But I personally don't have too much insight on why this could have been degenerate. Pablo, I think you mentioned you were doing a little bit of brewing with this card and perhaps saw a bit of the reason why they maybe banned this before the set dropped. Could you enlighten us?
So one of the decks I was trying when Guardian Mastery Pack dropped was Valda, right? And after trying a few different iterations of the deck, I finished playing one deck that did rely on playing big auras on the turn before and generating some seismics to then attack you with a very big dominated cross effect, right? Nothing surprising. I believe that's one of the ways they want that deck to be played. And a pattern that I did find during the games that I won and I destroyed my opponent was the fact that on that big turn, I happened to draw a Toka big game, and then I had another on the next turn. So what happens is that the first one is unfair. It's a 0-cost blue card that gives you a +7 or whatever. But the second one is even more unfair because it feeds, right? They have this incremental value thing where they are very, very powerful if you get to get your attack either dominated or intimidate the whole hand, right? And we are seeing 2 new heroes with mechanics that seem to lead to that problem. I can believe Goliath, the new 5 intellect hero, will be able to search the deck very fast, and it will not be difficult to play 2 of them in a succession. And we have seen cards that allow you to intimidate your opponent 3 times and things like that, and auras that you can play and then mm, work a little bit around with the suspense counters to get all of the in a single turn. And I believe that will not be that difficult to achieve in a deck like that, and potentially give like a very bad negative player experience.
Right.
Uh, so that's my 2 cents on the card. The card is actually a very, very card that did not have any good users because it was either Guardians or Reiner, which are famously not good decks. But that did not make that card less good.
I actually never thought about the way different copies of this card chain into each other, but that is, yeah, I could see that being extremely scary. The first one's like a 0 for 4 block 3 blue, which is already very good, and the next one's a 0 for 8, and then now you're just approaching levels of this is actually just impossible to deal with. Tariq, did you mess around with this card at all?
I kind of started looking at it when I read the confidence token, and I basically agree with everything Pablo said. I think this is a similar bucket as the Plume of Evergrowth Band, where they kind of foresee it doing degenerate things, and they just kind of want to get ahead of it. Being able to play this card because the confidence tokens are functionally just they're almost better dominate in a lot of ways because it actually works out of Arsenal or dealing with D-Reacts in Arsenal. And I think a blue that also acted as a really good resources that played defensively pretty well. That also had extreme offensive potential. Was something that they deemed a problem. So I have no problem with this ban. I think, I agree with everything Pablo said.
Awesome. I don't think we have too much more to talk about this card, given, as we've all talked about, it's mostly preemptive. It's not really changing anything currently, but all right. I for one, I'm glad that they're doing like these sort of preemptive bans. I think it's much better than having even small moments of time where there's this absolutely degenerate thing going around, like when Verdance and LL, when she had the whole Kraken's Eighth of Vein for a little bit, or when people were testing Needle's Ira before Hunted came out, and I was like, cool, yeah, I don't think we really need these sort of things. So moving on to the next format, which will be featured at Worlds, Living Legend. We had one change in Living Legend with this announcement as well. Deadwood Dirge has been unrestricted. Now, I want both of y'all's thoughts, as both of you are going to be Worlds competitors. Spoiler to people who didn't know that. Pablo and Tariq are both going to be at Worlds. Woo. I want your thoughts on, I guess, the LL format in general as part of Worlds, and I guess this change as well, the Dirge change. Tariq, let's go ahead and start with you.
So a couple things. One, I think LL is an interesting format. It reminds me of old Flesh and Blood, before some of the new age changes. There's a nostalgia component for me. I enjoy some of the old heroes. So in that terms point of view, I like it. And it's a new format to kind of explore inside the constructed metagame. Historically, I've never really been a super big fan of draft in Flesh and Blood. So kind of, they're taking a little bit of a side swipe or whatever to limited, but I'm happy I don't have to draft at Worlds. I know the community kind of disagrees with me on that. That's just my opinion. I think I'm better off with just two constructed formats. I'm happy in that regard. In terms of LL, the format in general, I've actually really enjoyed it. I think some of the bans and changes they've made since Chicago, which is the last time I played it, there's an LL calling. A lot has changed. Chain has taken a significant nerf in Carrion Husk, Call, and gonna get the other one wrong. The card that discards on hit, played as an instant.
Call. Yeah.
There was another one though.
Succumb to Temptation.
Succumb to Temptation. So I think they knocked probably the two best decks in Chain and Starvo down a peg, and it's kind of opened up the metagame. We see Ira coming in now, Prism still around. So I'm really looking forward to testing another constructed metagame that's not classic constructed, and I'm really excited for it.
Cool. Do you have any thoughts on the Deadwood Dirge unrestriction at all?
Not necessarily. I have not played a ton of RuneGate Chain as of yet. I've heard multiple people say that it's extremely good. Other people that say that it's kind of medium. I personally haven't put that much time into testing it, so I don't want to tell people one thing and then have it be another. It is something I'm going to test because I do know there's a faction of players that do think it's really strong. At this moment, I have no opinion on it because I am not sure.
Every time I hear you say something along the lines of you don't want to tell people one thing and then do another, I think of Knick Knack Bric-a-Brac. I just gotta bring that up.
Yeah.
Wouldn't
You
be an
cannot
episode with
escape.
you
You cannot
unless we
escape,
bring that
Derrick.
up.
This is going to haunt you forever, man.
Yeah.
Also, I for one do agree with you on the limited thing. I do like that they're trying at least to like not have limited for tier 4 event, especially on the coverage side of things. The viewership just absolutely tanks when limited comes up, and I feel like with this change, I think we might be able to actually keep a consistently high viewership because it's all constructed and people can actually play the decks that they are seeing being played. Pablo, do you have any thoughts on the LL changes or the LL being part of Worlds in general?
The first thing that I must say is that I have played very few games of Living Legend, right? So take all the things that I say, take them with a pinch of a grain of salt. So far, I am very happy to see the formats change at Worlds. It's not that I dislike draft per se. It's just the fact that changing formats around and even having like a full CC Pro Tour of Worlds would be something that I would welcome, like as the first one that we played. That was actually a very good Pro Tour, if I think back. Like good experience overall.
Really, you liked it? You liked the first one?
but yeah, I do think that that would be good to switch formats more often. And I do think that we have played a lot of draft lately. I wouldn't be against seeing it coming back in the future because I have seen a lot of dooming and glooming with the future of drafting some, but I believe LSS intends to keep it and we will see it coming back. I just think that maybe Super Slam was not the set to have at your highest level of competition at your biggest event of the year. And on the Living Legend thing, I have been having a blast the games I have played of the format. It feels very underexplored. It feels like there are very different and valid angles at approaching the games. I am just a little bit sad and mad that even in Living Legend I cannot play Front of Seats anymore. That card was very fun. Yeah, it was very broken as well, but that's fun to play, right? Give me something close to it. But so far it seems like the format is more balanced than I gave it credit for, and I'm very happy that we are going to get many more games during these upcoming weeks to see which deck is the best one. But I don't surprises during Worlds with that one. I am not sure that any player will register the deck and be 100% sure they are the best decision possible.
Okay, awesome. Glad to hear your thoughts on LL. Now, before I let y'all go, there is one final thing that was mentioned in this announcement, which I think we'd be remiss not to at least discuss, which is the date of the next BnR, which is, I don't remember the exact date off the top of my head, but it's basically less than 2 weeks before the World Championships. Before the World Championship. And now, both of you as competitors in the World Championships, I just want to hear your thoughts on that aspect of it, keeping in mind that this BnR could also affect the LL side of things and not just the CC side of things. So as competitors, where's your head on that? And we've seen that happen a couple of times this year already, right? That before the Pro Tours, I believe both Pro Tours this year, the weekend before, there was a possibility of a deck LLing, like Zen for the first Pro Tour of the year. And then before PT Singapore, Azalea actually did absolutely LL. Now, we were sort of, in a sense, fortunate that neither of those heroes were prime forces of the metagame, if you will. But with the potential of changes happening to both Worlds formats less than 2 weeks before World Championships, just want to get a quick temperature check on where both of you are on that. Pablo, let's start with you.
I was joking with you guys before starting this episode that the fact that we, for example, players need to sacrifice to give all of our free time to the flesh and yeah, I do think that is kind of the problem here. 2 weeks is very very close to the date of the tournament. I don't think people will have enough time to react. I think that just having that BnR there is very dangerous. It does not give like, at least it does not tell you what you want to hear as a player, right? I do prefer having like a full whole month. Like I guess that LSS needs to react in case they see something they don't want to be played at Worlds. Like maybe stuff like the Dash.io that we see played by Sam on the last Worlds or something like that. Like it is like fully degenerate thing and they need to act. Yeah, I believe they should be able to do something about that, but they need to think about how us players are scared of things changing. And as you have mentioned, both formats can change. This is not like if we have draft. So we need to be very, very scared of anything changing and our deck decisions changing dramatically. I personally, that is as a player, right? My idea. Personally, I like when there's a little bit of chaos before tournaments. I believe that usually benefits me. That's that's my own thing, but I'm not afraid of changing decks like quickly the days before a tournament or whatever. But that does need you to have played a lot of games to be able to confidently choose another deck like 2 days before the event and change your whole strategy and bring them deck. So as a whole, I believe that people that are not completely devoted and have a lot of free time to pour into this game will should be scared of having a ban restricted announcement coming on just 2 weeks before the big event.
You did win Pro Tour 1, which was also like 2 weeks after the BnR that banned Skeletor and made a whole bunch of changes to the format. I mean, maybe it wasn't exactly 2 weeks, but it was a short span of time. Tariq, your thoughts?
I kind of view it as a safety valve. I don't think they're going to do anything. I bet my entire life savings that it's going to be no changes. I'm more annoyed when decks might LL naturally, and then their hand is kind of tied because they said they're, when something LLs, they're going to do it. I kind of wish they kind of put a stop valve where it's like 2 weeks before the PT. If something LLs, then great. We'll just, it LLs after the PT. But for this change, I think it's just a safety valve in case something is incredibly broken. They'll address it. Otherwise, I bet my entire fortune that it's no changes.
Cool. Awesome. Well, with that, we have discussed the entire BnR. I want to thank both of you again for coming on very graciously. It's been awesome to hear both of your takes on the bands and all the insights surrounding the format in general and past bands and stuff like that as well. Before we go, where can people find more of you, Pablo?
Oh, you can follow me on Twitter or whatever. I'm not used to this. You can follow me on Patreon as well. You can find the link on my Twitter, and we also have a podcast. But I must say, disclaimer: this in Spanish. Like I'm probably going to jump right now to the podcast because I believe they are still going. So if you want to come, say hi, practice the little Spanish that you learned on your high school or whatever, you are welcome.
Cool. And we put the links to that in the description of this video as well. Tariq, where can people get more Tariq Patel?
They can't. I made a cognizant effort over time that Twitter is getting more and more toxic over time. I've deleted it actually off my phone. I'll check it here and now and again, and I may engage once in a while. But at the end of the day, I really like where I am in my life. I like my mental health right now, and I think a lot of life right now, especially what other people talk about gaming or otherwise, is just kind of noise, and it's kind of detracting from my overall experience. So you can find me on the golf course. If you golf, you can come join me out there. I play a lot of hockey. You can follow me on the hockey ring. But in terms of the internet, I think I'm kind of going incognito, at least from a technological standpoint. And even podcasts, I do it because I love Arsenal Pass, but I've said no for almost 2 years now, where I don't engage with content anymore. So for everybody that still loves me or likes me, I appreciate you. I love you, but this is, I think, what's healthiest for me going forward until something changes.
Wow, I did not know that. Actually, thank you. I'm actually so honored and flattered that you did agree to come on. So thanks again for that, and Pablo, you as well. So with that, that was episode 229 with some very, very special guests. Hope you enjoyed that. Remember to leave some comments to suggest who you'd like to see in the next 2 episodes before Hayden gets back as well. And with that, we will see you in the next one.